Hi, this is Gabe from FluentForever.com. At this point, we've gone through all the sounds of American English. If you're using one of my pronunciation trainers, it's going to take you through all of these sounds, train your ears to hear them more accurately, and teach you the spellings that produce them. Then it'll push all of that data into your long-term memory. And if you're not, that's fine too. I made these videos to give you a passing familiarity with all the sounds of American English, so that when you study them in depth, they're going to feel more familiar. That'll make them easier to learn. In either case, I want to talk about English spelling rules before we finish. This is a challenging topic, as you might expect. Many of you who have already studied English may have come to the conclusion that English spelling is completely unpredictable. Because English words are borrowed from so many other languages, the spelling can seem totally random. But that's not entirely true. If you put completely fake words in front of English speakers, like phytation, nomological, or radiculophony, you'll tend to hear a lot of agreement on how those words should sound. And since there's a lot of agreement, it means that there are natural rules to this spelling system, which native speakers have internalized. Many of those rules are just a matter of memorization. The combination PH, for instance, is pronounced f, and the combination IGH is typically pronounced I. So, if you know those two, you'd be comfortable with the beginning of phytation. If you were to learn all of the rules, then you'd be in a pretty good position. You should be able to take a new word and accurately pronounce it around 80 to 90% of the time. And in cases where you follow the rules and still mispronounce something, it's generally going to be a small error. You may be using the wrong vowel, for instance, but it's at least a vowel that sounds similar to the correct one. In this video, we're going to cover a handful of important American English spelling rules that require just a touch of explanation, rather than just straight memorization. For the memorization part, I'd suggest using my English trainer. That should get all of the rules into your head within 2 to 3 weeks. So, that said, let's get started. We'll talk about 3 topics: how long and short vowels work in English, how C and G work, and last, word stress and its relationship to the unaccented schwa, or vowel. We'll begin with so-called long and short vowels. Many vowels in American English have one spelling that can produce 2 different possible sounds. For instance, the spelling A. For American English words, that produces A as in rat, or A as in rate. Or the spelling E. That can produce E as in pet, or E as in Pete. American English tends to classify its vowels into 2 categories. There are the so-called short vowels, A, E, I, and and then the so-called long vowels, A, E, I, O, U, or U. Let's start by talking about short vowels and how to identify them. So first off, just to clear things up, short vowels are not actually pronounced any shorter. Back in the year 1400, they were. Middle English spelling made a lot more sense and had short vowels along with long vowels that were mostly just longer versions of those same short vowels. But that's no longer the case, so we unfortunately have a lot more vowels to remember now. Our next step is to figure out how to identify when you're looking at a short vowel. There are 2 scenarios where you'll encounter short vowels in English. The first one is whenever you see one of English's 5 vowel letters, A, E, I, O, or U, followed by 2 consonants. So that gives you raffle, hell, cricket, rotten, and hummingbird. You'll notice in these examples that several of them have the same consonant doubled up in the spelling. But do note that English doesn't have double consonants. It's not raffle, hell, rotten, or hummingbird, but rather raffle, hell, rotten, hummingbird. The only reason you're seeing 2 consonants in a row is to help you recognize that the vowel is going to be one of our 5 short vowels. Moving on to the other scenario in which you'll encounter short vowels. That's at the end of a word, whenever the last letter in a word is a consonant, and the second to last letter is one of our 5 vowel letters. That shows up in examples like bat, wet, kit, rot, and cup. And just as an aside, since we have a bunch of words ending in T's and P's, 2 of our aspirated consonants from video 1, I wanted to point out that those aspirated consonants can become a lot less aspirated at the ends of words. While you can say bat and cup with aspiration, it's more common to stop that final consonant before you let the air out, giving you bat and cup. This is also a decent moment to mention that all aspirated consonants, PT and K, lose their aspiration after the consonant S. So star, spoon, and school all don't have any aspiration. Anyway, back to vowels. At this point, let's move on to long vowels and how to recognize them. First, just to help you remember which ones are which, with the exception of the E vowel, all of the so-called long vowels in English are actually just diphthongs of some sort. A, I, O, and U or U. Long vowels show up in English when you have one of our 5 vowel letters, followed by a single consonant, and then another vowel. So here's gator, centipede, bite, note, and mutation. This happens to be a huge source of silent E's in English. They help indicate when you're looking at a long vowel. Before we finish this long vowel discussion, I wanted to talk about long U, since it can sound like oo or you. The rule here is that most of the time, it's going to sound like you. So here's mutation, user, cute, and puke. But if the consonant that comes beforehand is made at your alveolar ridge, that ridge right behind your upper teeth, then long U is just pronounced oo. Those alveolar consonants are t, d, s, z, n, r, and l. And they can give you words like dude, loot, nude, rude, and super. We only have a couple of topics left, and the next one is pretty straightforward. How to pronounce hard and soft C and G. These 2 consonants have a so-called hard pronunciation and a soft one, which is an obnoxious concept that we stole from Latin and French. The hard pronunciations of C and G are k as in cow and g as in gopher. The soft versions of C and G are s as in cell and j as in gel. So how do you figure out which one to use? The spelling rule here is not so difficult. You'll use the hard pronunciation k or g when the next vowel letter is A, O, or U, giving you words like game, good, cad, cod, and cut. Whereas you'll use the soft pronunciation, s or j, if the next vowel is E, I, or Y, giving you words like G, city, gym, age, and ice. As with everything in English, there are exceptions to these rules, but still, these are pretty useful ones to know. And with that, we're on to our last topic, word stress. In English, word stress is extremely important. A stressed syllable can entirely change the meaning of a word. We have, for instance, incense and incense. The problem is that word stress is also extremely unpredictable in English. There are very few rules to help you predict word stress patterns. They don't apply to that many words, and they generally have exceptions. I'll give those rules to you, but practically, for most of the words you encounter, you're going to have to look stress up. The main reason I wanted to discuss word stress is to help you know how to pronounce a word properly once you do know where the stress goes. So first, let's chat about what makes a syllable sound stressed in English. Let's take a long word like pronunciation. The stressed syllable is that A sound towards the end. That's indicated in the IPA with that little quote mark thing before the stressed syllable. A. I'm making that syllable sound stressed by doing several things at once. First, I'm taking a longer time on that syllable. It's pronunciation, ba-dum-ba-dum-bum, and not pronunciation, ba-da-ba-da-ba. Second, I'm going up in both pitch and volume. It's pronunciation, ba-dum-ba-dum-bum, and not pronunciation, ba-da-ba-da-ba. Third, that stressed vowel, it's going to be very clearly articulated. It's everything you'd want out of an A diphthong, pronunciation. And last, you may notice that every other unstressed vowel in that word is a lot less clear. There's an E, for instance, right before that stressed vowel, but it's not pronunciation. That E vowel is a lot shorter and less distinct. Pronunciation. Same thing with the It's not pronunciation, it's just pronunciation. And all the rest of the vowels? They've all been replaced by English's standard unstressed schwa vowel, that sound in about and a tree. When a vowel is completely unstressed, it will often turn into that short, indistinct sound, which you get twice in this word. It's not pronunciation, but rather pronunciation. In terms of rules for word stress, here are the ones I think are useful. Most two-syllable words are stressed on the first syllable, giving you words like rainy, carton, china, and incense. Most exceptions to this rule are two-syllable verbs and prepositions, which are usually stressed on the last syllable. Relax, receive, between, and incense. When you have a single spelling that can be either a verb, like incense, or a different part of speech, for instance, a noun like incense, then you can be pretty confident that the verb form of that word will be stressed on its last syllable, and the other form will be stressed on its first syllable. Rules for words with 3 or more syllables start getting really complex, potentially more complex than just looking up the stress whenever you learn a new, long word. The only thing I want to make you aware of is that there are a lot of suffixes or word endings that have a predictable pattern. The syllable before any of these suffixes is often stressed. The suffix shun is one of these. So that gives you musician, physician, clinician. Same thing with able, giving you terrible, resistible, impossible. You stress the syllable right before the suffix. You don't need to memorize them all, but just keep an eye out and an ear out for them, and you'll start to notice those patterns. And with that, we've covered all of the complex rules of English. Everything else is just a matter of memorizing letter combinations and takes a lot less explanation. Let's quickly review and get out of here. In this video, we discussed 3 groups of spelling rules that required explanation rather than just memorization. Long and short vowels, hard and soft C and G, and word stress. With the long and short vowels, we had 5 vowel letters that could produce 10 or 11 sounds, so we needed some rules to help us figure out which sounds to use when. The short vowels were a, e, a, and and they showed up in 2 contexts. One, whenever you had one vowel followed by 2 consonants, as in raffle, hell, cricket, rotten, and hummingbird. And 2, whenever you were at the end of a word, and you had one vowel followed by 1 consonant, as in bat, wet, kit, rot, and cup. This was also where we mentioned that the aspirated consonants P and T usually become a lot less aspirated at the ends of words. So most speakers say bat rather than bat. We also took a moment here to mention that all aspirated consonants lose their aspiration after the consonant S, giving you star, spoon, and school rather than star, spoon, and school. We then discussed the long vowels, A, E, I, O, U, and U, which typically showed up when you had a vowel followed by a single consonant and then another vowel, as in gator, centipede, bite, note, and mutation. We also briefly discussed the long vowel U or U, which is usually pronounced U with that Y sound, as in mutation or user. But when it comes after a consonant made at the alveolar ridge, that ridge right behind your upper teeth, then it's pronounced oo, as in dude, loot, nude, rude, and super. We then talked about C and G, which are pronounced hard, k or g, when the next vowel is A, O, or U, as in game, cod, or cut, and they're pronounced soft, s or j, if the next vowel is E, I, or Y, giving you words like G, city, and gym. Finally, we talked about word stress, which had 4 important components. You made the stressed syllable longer, and you went up in both pitch and volume, giving you pronunciation and not pronunciation. And you made the stressed vowel clear, while the other vowels became less clear, giving you pronunciation rather than pronunciation. Finally, we covered a few rules that might be useful if you want to predict where the word stress is going to be in a new word. To begin, most two-syllable words are stressed on the first syllable, giving you rainy, carton, and incense. And most exceptions to this rule were verbs and prepositions, which tend to stress the last syllable, as in relax, between, and incense. And if you're looking at longer words, the only rule I'd pay attention to is the idea that suffixes or word endings can have some predictable patterns. For many words, the syllable before certain common suffixes is stressed, giving you words like musician, physician, and clinician, or terrible, resistible, and impossible. And with that, we've finished our series on American English pronunciation. If you need a hand in memorizing all of this and training your ears to hear it, then grab an American English trainer from my website linked below. You'll have all of this memorized within a couple of weeks. I'll see you next time.